It can't be just me, right? You've probably seen suggested videos on YouTube with keyboards that sound so good that it makes you question why your clickety-clackety Razer keyboard doesn't sound anywhere near as nice. Well, this is a rabbit hole that I actually fell down last year in 2022 and slowly drifted deeper and deeper and deeper into it. And basically, I just wanted to share my own experiences with you. Let's get started. Custom keyboards are a trend that have been around for quite a while now. And there are a ton of great keyboard-centric YouTube creators out there that somehow make the topic of keyboards, you know, the thing that you type on during the 9-to-5 grind in an office building, and make it fun, interesting, sound great, and look so freaking cool. And that was no exception for me either. I've always struggled with finding the perfect keyboard. If you've been a longtime follower of this channel, you know how many different keyboards I've gone through throughout all these years. I mean, it's something that I use for at least 8 hours a day. Kind of like how it's important for you to sit in an ergonomic desk chair and not a bar stool all day. You gotta have a good keyboard too, right? For your fingers. So it seemed like the perfect solution was to just build it myself. That way I get all the features that I want in the layout that I want with absolutely no compromises. And that's what I originally set out to do. But while I fell down this rabbit hole of custom keyboards, so did my significant other. Well, sorta. She just saw some videos on YouTube and liked how pretty some of the keyboards looked and loved how they sounded. So that kind of gave me an interesting idea. She could be my guinea pig. I'll make my first custom keyboard a keyboard just for her. And plus, if I mess up, she's gotta live with it, not me. Bad jokes aside, learning all about this hobby and the type of things people do to make their perfect keyboard was genuinely interesting. What did it take? Before you even decide on a keyboard, you have to figure out what you want in a keyboard. For my significant other, it just meant a keyboard that matched her room's aesthetic, sounded creamy, and feels like butter. Let's start by talking about all the different parts that make up a keyboard. The keyboard body itself, the keycaps, the key switches, and then lastly, mods. Keyboards come in a bunch of different sizes. The most common ones that I've seen are 100%, which are these full-size keyboards with the number pad on the side, 80%, which are also known as 10 keyless, which have separated arrow keys and the 6 different navigation buttons above it. Then there's 75% keyboards, which are what the Keychron K2, GMMK Pro, and Logitech MX Mechanical uses, that kind of push the arrow keys to the side of the main keys and keeps some of the navigation keys on top. But then there's also 65%, which remove the entire function row of keys. There are even smaller sizes, but most people will be looking at these type of keyboards. There's also different keyboard shapes, but for this first project, we're gonna stick with standard sizes and layouts because some of those more unique sizes come with their own unique challenges too. There are plenty of options for different keyboard cases out there, and there are many options for all sorts of different form factors. If you're familiar with building a PC, it's kind of like selecting a PC case. This kind of controls the overall aesthetic of the build. While the exterior does provide aesthetic value, it also affects the angle of the keyboard itself, and depending on body material, could also affect the sound of the final product. Basically, every choice you make determines how it looks, feels, and sounds. Usually the keyboard case comes with the PCB, which is the actual board that gets plugged into your computer to control the keyboard. And sometimes you can also get additional features with the keyboard, like Bluetooth support or QMK or VIA support, which let you reconfigure the buttons and is super useful if you use both a Mac and a PC or just want to remap some keys. From my own experience though, Bluetooth is nice to have, but on custom keyboards, aren't usually great, and battery life doesn't last long, only a couple of days. So think of the custom keyboard as wired first and wireless secondary. For my wife's build, we're gonna go with the Zoom 65, a metal 65% layout keyboard with a cool little knob to control media functions and a nice color-matched reflective plate on the bottom. This keyboard case, honestly, looks really cool. Beyond that, you also have to consider the type of key switches you want. Key switches are actually one of the bigger factors on how a keyboard feels and sounds. Most custom keyboards use these type of key switches called Cherry MX, which to quickly explain is the shape and layout of the switch itself. There are other types, and I don't mean to ignore them, but for the sake of not making this video over an hour long, Cherry MX is by far the most common one within the keyboard building community, at least based on what I've seen. So within Cherry MX key switches, there are 3 main styles that you can pick from that control the feel and sound of the keyboard. And honestly, it's all personal preference. There are clicky switches, linear switches, and tactile key switches. Clicky key switches are usually the loudest and have this nice clicky bump at the bottom of the press. This is the only clicky keyboard I have in the house, so you'll have to bear with me here. Tactile keys normally have a medium sound and a little bump at the bottom of the press, which I can demonstrate on this keyboard here. And then finally, linear is usually the quietest and has no bump at the end of the press. Personally, I like tactile switches, and they're normally associated with the color brown, and that's definitely why I'm wearing a brown shirt. Yeah, definitely not coincidence. I intended that. But seeing what type of key switches a person likes is one of the harder things to gauge, because key switches have to be felt and heard for someone to understand the characteristics of that particular switch. Here's a quick example of how a tactile key switch sounds compared to a linear one on the exact same keyboard using the exact same keycaps. As you just heard, there is a distinct difference in terms of sound, but there is also a distinct difference in terms of feel, which is something I just can't show you on a screen like this. Obviously, this hobby is still growing, but you can find a small selection of keyboards and key switches on display at a local Best Buy. Or if you're lucky and live near a micro center, they actually have most of their keyboards on display and even have a section that has different key switches on display for someone to try out. At least the one in Houston, Texas does. Those are probably the best places to get a gauge on the type of key switches that you might like without outright buying some switch samples to test out. But that's also an option too, if you want to quickly test out a bunch from the comfort of your own home. How they sound though will be tough to choose despite what you hear, because the sound of each switch will be different depending on the body it's going in and the keycaps that you put on top. So it's really hard to determine exactly how it will sound, but hearing it in person or through YouTube can give you a general idea of how it sounds. Just don't expect the exact same sound you see or hear in that video or in person. When we tried different switches in store, my wife actually liked linear switches. So for this build, we went with the Gateron Oil King. It definitely has a weird name. That's pretty common with just key switches in general. Like, what is a Boba U4T exactly? Is that supposed to be a milk tea topping or a Star Wars character? Who the heck knows? When you buy key switches, just keep in mind that they come in small packs. Since keyboard sizes are all different, everyone will need a different number of switches. You can mix and match different key switches in a single keyboard if you want, but that leads to an inconsistent typing experience on different keys. But you know, you do you. All right, now let's talk about keycaps. To me, these are mostly personal preference and contribute significantly to the overall aesthetic of the build. Since besides the keyboard case, this is the most looked at part of the keyboard. Keycaps come in a bunch of different colors, shapes, fonts, materials, and can even affect how your keyboard sounds. However, the quality, fit, and finish of each keycap set will be completely different depending on the type of keycaps you buy and the quality of the manufacturing. There are some keycaps in the keyboard community that are generally considered one of the more premium options, and these are the GMK keycaps. I would say these are the Gucci or Louis Vuitton of the keycap world. They're considered premium keycaps with good print, keycap quality, and come in a bunch of different colorways. But they are super expensive too, at least $100 or more for a single set, which is also roughly the cost of a whole mechanical keyboard from well-known brands. I said or more because oftentimes these keycaps are only printed once or twice in batches, and then the secondhand market charges ridiculous amounts for rare, highly desired keycap sets. That being said, there are a ton of GMK dupes out there as well of popular GMK colorways, but the quality will obviously vary significantly. But hey, that's just keyboard enthusiast standards. You don't have to get GMK keycaps just because they're the premium standard. There are plenty of other keycap options out there that are budget friendly, or if you want to pay even more, much more pricey and higher end. When it comes to keycaps, they're mainly made out of plastic, and the two types of plastics that you'll find in these mechanical keyboards are ABS and PBT. The main difference between these are explained really well by Switch and Click's website on this same topic, where they have a nice little table outlining the primary differences between them, and they also have a really informative YouTube channel, so check that out. There are other important things about keycaps as well. There's the shape of the keycap. Some will be sloped a certain way, some will be flat on top, they'll be concave, you name it. So do your research and look in stores for mechanical keyboards with similar keycaps that you like. For my wife, she didn't have too much of a preference in terms of shape or feel of the keycap, so we went with these nice looking keycaps from Musume to complete the color scheme of the overall keyboard. Okay, now you have everything sorted out. You have a list of parts. It's time to buy your parts, right? Wait, what is this? Wait lists? Group buys? Interest checks? What does all this stuff have to do with making a keyboard? Well, the thing about custom keyboards is that they are custom and still a hobby that has a bunch of growing pains. It's not as streamlined as the PC building community. A lot of the times, keyboard components that are more unique or fit a specific aesthetic, you gotta be in the right place at the right time and also willing to wait to get them. Some components have interest checks to see if there's enough people out there that are willing to buy a specific case, keycap, or switch. Then there's the pre-order phase where they take additional orders before the actual components are produced and then shipped out to their actual purchasers. This is the process for a lot of different keyboard bodies and keycaps, and it can be really discouraging for people who are just starting out because oftentimes the parts you want are not going to be in production for months and they'll slowly just trickle into your mailbox with time. So if you're looking for a real custom experience, do keep in mind that it takes a lot of time to gather all the components you want to build that perfect keyboard. But if you're impatient, there are some customizable keyboards that you can buy right away, like the GMMK keyboards by Glorious and the K, V, and Q series keyboards by Keychron. They won't give you the full custom keyboard building experience, but it's kind of like buying a pre-built computer and upgrading the insides later. Not a bad option if you need something quickly, but in our case, we're gonna buy components and suffer during our whole wait because we're impatient and desperately want that instant gratification. Okay, so once all the parts arrive, it's actually pretty easy to put the keyboard together. They usually come with instruction manuals that make it really easy to understand. Make changes to the body of the keyboard, screw the stabilizers into the PCB, put the PCB in the case, add any sound deadening materials provided, then put on the key switches, then put on the keycaps. Super easy, just follow instructions. It's like putting together IKEA furniture. The whole process takes about 2 or so hours, and now you have a complete keyboard. All right, video's over, we're done. Thanks for watching. Just kidding. This is where someone can fall even deeper into the rabbit hole. Modding. Basically, to get the best feeling and sounds out of their keyboards, custom keyboard enthusiasts modify the existing parts so that they can sound and feel even better when pressed. That's when you hear terms within the community like the blue tape mod, lubing your keys and switches and stabilizers, and even using packing foam to fill out the keyboard casing as sound deadening materials. There's so many different acronyms and terms that it almost sounds like a cult, and the deeper I dug into it, I realized, well, it is a cult. And we're accepting new members. Joking aside, there are plenty of great keyboard YouTubers that provide in great detail how to properly apply these mods. In my own scenario, the only mods I did was lubing the stabilizers and lubing the key switches, which improves the feel of the keys of the keyboard. Just understand that modding usually occurs during the building process, not after. This video has it after only because it just makes more sense logically when I'm talking about it. And to show you what I meant earlier by different keyboards can sound different despite having the same key switches, here's a quick example. Okay, now that we have a complete custom keyboard, what did I think of the whole experience? And does my wife enjoy this keyboard? And will I be making a custom one on my own now that I've seen how it looks, felt how it feels, and heard how it sounds? Well, it was honestly fun to learn something new and try to figure it all out. It's kind of like the same feeling you get when you build your first computer and you finally get it to boot after the several hours it took to put it all together. It's the same thing when you assemble a keyboard and see all the keys are working. You get that same sense of accomplishment, but the cost of custom components can quickly add up. This keyboard that I've built right here costs around $350 to make between the keyboard casing, the key switches, keycaps, prep materials like lube and brushes, and the shipping costs, which, by the way, is pretty common for keyboards and their components. Of course, that's only because I was willing to pay that much. You can easily put something together for much less that still feels and sounds good, like my Keychron K2. I just replaced the default switches for Boba U4Ts and then looped the switches, and it felt and sounded so much better for a total cost of under $200. But again, this is not truly custom. But if you are willing to spend a decent chunk of money, you'll end up with something super cool that feels uniquely yours. And while $350 sounds pretty pricey for this keyboard. Since all the components are modular, we can always reuse certain components, change out pieces that are getting old, that are falling apart, or get a new case altogether if we're looking for a new experience, which you can't normally do with a bog standard mechanical keyboard from a big brand. Also, building a custom keyboard doesn't have to be expensive either. Amazon has a ton of hot swappable mechanical keyboards that you can just buy and start tinkering with. It's a really nice budget-friendly way to get into this hobby. Just don't go expecting the nicest keyboards around, especially at those low of price ranges. And while I keep comparing it to building a computer, honestly, it was much easier. As for my wife, she likes how it ended up, and it fits perfectly in her workspace, just like how she wanted it to. Well, building one was super fun, and I think I'll be working on building something for myself pretty soon. Overall, I think building a custom keyboard is a fun way to learn something new and get the exact look, feel, sound, and functionality that you want out of a keyboard. You really get to control every aspect of a device that a lot of people use daily. And at this point, I'm just ready to make the next one. Anyway, what do you personally think? Have you created your own custom keyboard? What do you think of it? Maybe you haven't started yet. Are you thinking of making one? What was the hardest part? The easiest? Let me know in the comment section below. And if you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up. And well, I'll see you all next time. Bye.